All right, being live streamed.
Yeah, I'm I'm very impressed with you, by the way, that you're right on time because you're never on time.
Well,
Usually, it's I need to get ready. I need to put on my makeup. I need to finish this beer.
people watching. Jeez.
Oh, well, that's okay. That's true. It's all true, Mary. It's all true. Nothing but the truth. So help me God. Anyway, so let's get ready to set up here.
All
Yeah.
right,
Hope it
here we
warms
go.
up today. I'd like to get outside and do something today.
Be nice
Fix
too.
this. Wouldn't it though? Wouldn't it though? Wouldn't it
Mhm.
though? All right. Okay. So it looks like
Yeah.
you're in a halfway decent mood today yourself. That's pretty
Oh,
good.
jeez. Good morning to everybody watching right now.
There's nobody watching.
There's one person watching.
It's probably me because
No, no, there's three.
Okay, that's fine. Whatever. I'm just teasing you, but yeah, it's good. That's good. It's always fun to scroll with you. It's freaking bad. Anyway, yeah. So we'll get going with this, and yeah, it'll be a good day. You got some stuff you got to do later this afternoon, so we'll sit back and get ready for what I imagine is going to be a disastrous hockey game. But that's okay. We'll watch that tonight. We'll have fun with
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not looking forward to the hockey game.
I'm looking forward to the warm weather. I'm looking forward to getting back to Pennsylvania personally. Not
I
gonna lie.
look forward to just not having to worry about schoolwork.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. That
Yeah.
is true.
Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody, the three people that are watching. So, yeah, we just released our episode on the siege of Yorktown. Good morning, Barbara.
Oh, hey.
Um, which
The
was
Siege of
episode
Yorktown.
which was episode 127, which is pretty cool. Um,
Hmm.
Hi, Bill Etzkorn's on here. Good morning. Maybe we'll see him in a couple of weeks down in Gettysburg on Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, that's going to be a good weekend. It sounds like
Morning, Cindy.
it sounds like the warm weather has definitely arrived. In Gettysburg, it's upper 80s the other day when my friend Doug was down at the house. But no, it's good though. But it's gonna be great to get back down. We'll be down there Memorial Day weekend, so we got a lot of cool things we'll talk about here in a little while. That we got some stuff planned and some things that we're trying to plan.
Morning, Richard. Good morning, Scott.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hopefully, it's a happy Saturday in your world. And it's been a while since we did this in the morning. We did because we were traveling a week or two ago, and then
well, we were away a couple weekends, and then last weekend we didn't have it because we did the Tuesday night one, but whatever. So we're back to our usual morning Facebook or YouTube live, not Facebook, but YouTube. So morning water killer Jim, Rob Dalby, good morning.
Yeah, I saw Rob Dalby. I saw he was at the baseball game last night, Mary. The PNC is the best new park in America, by the way. We were at the Red Sox game at Fenway a couple of nights ago. I don't know if you remember. You were there.
Happy Star Wars Day, Miranda. Yeah, so we recorded Siege of Yorktown. Our next episode that drops is going to be in a couple weeks. It is going to drop, I think, on May 17th, and it is our episode that we did with Alan Guelzo, which was a great episode. We recorded it a few weeks ago, and it was about his new book that is coming out on May 21st, which is called Voices from Gettysburg, which is a collection of letters that tell the story of the battle. So it's basically
right here, Mary.
Yep.
We got an advanced copy from Dr. Gelzo. No, that's a good one. I know we'll talk about this Yorktown here in a little bit, but Voices from Gettysburg is really cool because what he does is he talks about the battle chronologically, the whole campaign really from right from June 3rd all the way until till mid-July when they cross at Williamsport, and he talks about what happened, but then he backfills it with stories of letters and they're all primary source stuff, and they're all most of these letters I haven't read before, so they're really good. The thing about Dr. Gelzo is, he believes what he believes, and he's very heavily focused on the politics part of the Army of the Potomac. And I know it rubs people the wrong way, specifically talking about Meade, but we talk about that in the episode about having him show his homework on Meade, and it's interesting. So I think people will like that. I found Gelzo to be a great guy.
He was really great to hang with and talk. He's very balanced, like any historian. He has his opinions, but he's very he's great to talk with. Really good guy. I enjoyed doing that recording with him. Gettysburg Addresses is on here, so Getty's Gear is on here, and they said nice shirt for you.
Oh yeah, here we go. So they're great people.
If you guys are in Gettysburg, get over to Getty's Gear. It is awesome. They've got like cigars, really awesome coffee. They've got dog treats, all that. I think they're dog friendly as well, which is really, really cool. They've
Yeah,
got
go
really
go
cool
go see your friend
t-shirts.
Carrie. Go see your friend Carrie. He's a good guy. And I think they're still looking for boxes for cigars. I think I mentioned that before. I know when we come down in a few weeks, I've got about 7 or 8 boxes to drop off to him from all those cigars I bought from them. But they're the best cigars anywhere, and he's a
Yeah.
great dude. So we'll
And
we'll
they're
talk more.
expanding as well, which is really cool. So good for them. Like they're
Yeah,
expanding the
yeah,
space they have. So that's really, really awesome. So yeah,
yeah.
good for them.
Cigars in the world. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
right here, my favorite. Some of my biggest cigar nerds have who I've smoked cigars with for years and years and years. I bring Getty's Gear cigars. They all say they've had Cubans. They say these are the best cigars I've ever had
They're
to a man.
very, very
And
good.
that's high praise from a lot of the people who say that too. So well done
Um,
with that.
our friend Michael, 6 questions lenses on here from Dressing Gettysburg. Very cool. Good morning, Michael.
Do
He's
you remember
ready.
that time we were on with Matt and Veronica and all them,
The
and
first time, yeah.
he wore the hockey mask?
That was awesome. I think we took a picture where he had it. Michael's a cool guy.
No, he is. He's
He
doing
knows his
well.
stuff about the Battle of Gettysburg. And I think about Brandy Station too, which is pretty cool.
I just worked for Bernie Station. So anyway, yeah.
Yep.
So Yorktown was interesting. We
Before we
talked
get to
about
that, we do have a legitimate history question from somebody.
Oh,
Water Killer asks, he said, as a German, I love these podcasts, so thank you. He said, why did Germans fight for the South? I know why they fought for the North, like anti-slavery, for the Union, they fled from failed rebellions, but why? Well, we've talked about the Irish in that regard, like why somebody like Pat Claiborne fights for the South versus, some of the other Irish, and there was that religious difference. I've never really read anything about why some of the Germans.
Well, it's similar to the Irish. It depends on where you came into the country. I mean, you talk about the Irish, about the Irish and Cobb's Brigade, the Georgians, right? 8th Georgia, the guys who fought at Fredericksburg. They fought for the South because they emigrated from Ireland and landed in Savannah. In a similar situation with the Germans. If you were a German and you're coming over here, and not just the ones like the Franz Siegels and the Karl Scherzers of the world who came here to specifically fight. If you landed in Savannah or you landed in Charleston and that's where you were, that's where you made your home. Don't forget too, there was a conscription act that was put in 1862. So a lot of these guys had no choice but to fight where they lived. And that's a big reason why. It's because you fight for your home and wherever your home happens to be. But a lot of the Germans who fought for the South had no choice but to fight for the South.
Yeah,
it happened where they lived. That's the most common way. I don't think you're going to get a lot of people who are going to fight for the South just because of political reasons. A lot of that is just because that's where you happen to be. But again, a lot of them were forced to.
Yeah, right? Exactly. I know why. And then the North, it's very much that a lot of these guys in the North, like Franz Siegel, I think von Gilsa, they had all been involved in that. I think it was the 1948 revolution, and so they're over there fighting. 1848. Yes, 1848. 1948 was when
maybe
the
Cleveland
Guardians last won the World Series.
Maybe they had a day. But thinking 1948 last couple of days.
But it's speaking of the Germans, this is also we're around the anniversary of Chancellorsville when the 11th Corps gets routed at Chancellorsville. And Stonewall Jackson has what, in my opinion, is one of his greatest moments in the Civil War. And that's what people don't really talk about, is like they just talk about how the 11th Corps gets routed. They don't actually talk about the fact that no matter who you are getting removed from that position.
Well, we talked a lot about it. A lot of times it's you play the blame game. We always talk about slicing up that blame pie. Who's going to be blamed, right? And we see it a lot with John Bell Hood in Spring Hill. We don't get enough credit for Schofield.
Yeah.
And even the episode we just did, people, and we admittedly, we did kind of point out a lot of McClellan's foibles and mistakes and the inexcusable errors he made on the peninsula leading up to Yorktown. But you got to give credit to John Bankhead Magruder. And people who don't, I mean, I'm sure people here know who he is, but the average person, they don't know, they've never heard of John Magruder because he's just not one of those guys. But again, this is a guy who in 1862 was a third highest ranking general in what will become the Army of Northern Virginia at that point. He's in charge of the Army of the Peninsula. He's a guy who takes 12,000 men, installs 58,000 Union troops who are already outside of that Warwick line, with another 40,000 to 50,000 still at Fort Monroe ready to come across. And he pulls off one of the greatest rope-a-dopes to really pants George McClellan not only him, but Fitzjohn Porter,
Yep.
Alan Pinkerton, and he does it all knowing that at any moment this gigantic monster could wake up and swallow them all.
Yep.
And he has to do it. So he doesn't get a lot of credit for Yorktown because it's easier to rip on McClellan. But it really should go both ways with that. And you don't hear enough of that with Magruder. You hear more of the anti-McClellan. That being said, Mary,
he does not have a good moment here. Now
McClellan deserves everything he gets for this one. He does.
Yeah, and Loaf says Magruder was one of the ones that Bobby Lee kicked out. Miranda does say that Jackson would have annihilated anyone in that spot. Howard just happened to have drawn the short straw on where he was. He's also hanging in the air. Like,
that's the thing too, is that Hooker, speaking of Chancellorsville, Hooker doesn't expect the Confederates to hit that flank. They're getting conflicting reports from Dan Sickles is saying they're retreating. Everyone thinks they're retreating. But don't forget too, Hooker took away Barlow. He took away a lot of troops away from that flank because they never thought they were going to be hit. And you mentioned in the air, it's a good point. You know, we visited that ground, and when Jackson's army was hitting that flank, that line was so long that the troops that were marching, some of them were still in camp waiting to go. Yeah. It's like the Boston Marathon. You're at the back of the line ready to start. Yeah. That's how big this was. He had no chance. I don't care who the hell it's going to be.
Yeah.
And give Jackson, I mean, admittedly, any general could have pulled it off with apologies to Jackson, but it was his idea to do it, which is why he gets credit for it. I mean, you could have had anybody do it, but he had to convince Robert E. Lee to split that army for the third time in the face of a greater army. So give credit to Jackson, credit to Lee for that. But yeah, Howard had no chance. And it's funny because at this time, especially in your social media, people like to take these little victory laps with Howard, right?
Yeah.
And my favorite one is the whole, and then he repeated it again at Gettysburg.
I know he didn't,
which is wrong. It's just actually wrong. But again, it's death taxes rip on Howard in early May. That continues into Gettysburg. But that's why we study
it is
history,
funny. And then I didn't get as much this year about it at all, actually, because I did do a post on my own Facebook page and Instagram about, just saying yes, Howard gets routed. And he writes in his memoir something to the effect that I'm going to get ripped for this. I'm going to get blamed. My corps is going to get blamed and all that. Waterkiller says it's kind of a blind spot in that area. And it is. Like, if you go to Chancellorsville, you really understand what happened there. Now, the interesting thing is after Chancellorsville, in that kind of lull between Chancellorsville and the Gettysburg campaign, there is we suspect it might be Meade. A high-ranking Union officer wrote Howard a letter and told him to put in a request to be moved to a different corps. And the person that wrote the letter said, because they will always run. And Michael Lentz brings up the fact that, the 11th Corps was subject to the prejudice at the time against the German immigrants. So they're going into this already with prejudices against them. And that Howard writes about that in his memoir, that, he's basically been told by a high-ranking officer who he considers a friend that to leave his corps. Now, Howard is the type of person that he does not throw really anybody under the bus, never mentions the guy's name. Like I said, we suspect that person was Meade. So Howard ends that chapter in his memoirs by saying, my men deserved another chance and they would get it at Gettysburg. That's how we
talked a lot about the politics of the Army of the Potomac, especially the Gettysburg campaign, right? And I'm not sure who would have taken that corps, because don't forget, when you're looking at guys like Reynolds, Hancock, you're talking about guys like Sedgwick, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about guys like Sickles. These are Democrats who were very anti-immigrant.
Yes.
They were not anti-slavery, they were pro-union, but they were not very big on immigrants. Now, remember, 1 in every 4 Union soldiers who fought was from somewhere else. So who else? I mean, you had a lot of anti-feeling already within that army. And when we talk about the night of July 2nd of 1863, East Cemetery Hill, what's the narrative, right? After von Gilsa takes off, and you've got Weidrich's battery, and you get everything fighting against Hayes and everybody fighting against Avery, right? Who comes to save the day? It's Samuel Carroll from the Second Corps. No one mentioned Shizanovsky, who also came.
No.
So that's how the history goes with this stuff. Now, Carroll did a lot of things, and no question he did. But But he wasn't the only one. But that's the feeling at the time.
Yeah.
It's very, and this country still isn't very big on immigrants. It never
No.
has been.
Yeah.
But again, that's the whole mindset with this stuff.
Yeah.
So Howard is in a situation where he's going to command a lot of these guys. He's going to hold the line. Now, it's not all immigrants. He's got Barlow. He's got a Delbart Ames. He's got guys with that 11th Corps too. But he has that element. And when you're talking specifically, since I'm thinking about East Cemetery Hill, they're told, they're telling guys like Weidrich's Battery, you're gonna fight here till the death, because when the shit hits the fan, these guys are gonna take off, and that's what happens. And so you have that great artillery battle fighting against those troops at that night attack, but the Rebs are right up to the guns. And you're talking about guys, taking rocks and cracking skulls of the rebels with lack of infantry to support until Carroll and Shizanovsky finally do come. Yeah. So they weren't wrong.
No, and the interesting thing too is, like, Howard taking over the 11th Corps, I think it's just before Fredericksburg, is, Franz Sigel has basically been like, he's asked for more men, and Washington is like, nope. And then he's like, fine, I'm not doing it anymore then. And he leaves. He's German too. So they are going from having a commander who can speak their language, who understands their culture, because the culture is very different than, the Christian culture that Howard has, right? And also, after Howard takes over, the Union kind of cuts the rations of some of the alcohol, and then the Germans are like, not they're like, wait, what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking back in the Peninsula campaign real quick with this, and speaking of Howard, we didn't really mention Howard too much with this, but Howard's there. He's part of Israel Richardson's division, right? The thing about Howard is, even his own men, the non-Germans had issues with him. We talked a lot about how when he takes over for Franz Sigel, a lot of the Germans get all pissed, right? No one loves a pissed off German. I'll tell you, that's a bad situation right there. But who is in Howard's? Who's some of Howard's regimental commanders, right? He's got Edward Cross, 5th New Hampshire, who hates immigrants. Yeah. He hates immigrants. He hates
I think Edward Cross hates everybody.
But he's an angry New Hampshire fellow from Lancaster, New Hampshire. He's also got Francis Barlow under him at this point, right? So again, Barlow had no real issues with Howard that I know of, but Cross certainly did. And we'll talk a lot more about Edward Cross down the road here a little bit. But the thing about that is people don't tend to focus on the personal biases and the politics involved with this. And we were talking with Gelzo a few weeks ago about this. Is you're in a situation where you've got 7 Corps commanders, 6 of which are West Point guys. You've got at least 4 who are Democrats who don't agree with the Lincoln administration, including Reynolds, including Hancock, right? Including obviously Sickles and Sedgwick. Yeah. And these are people who have all these political machinations now, where they're going from fighting for the Union to, after January 1st, 1963, fighting for emancipation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them didn't sign up for that. So a lot of that, and we see a lot of that specifically with how people have attitudes towards Meade, right? How Meade had attitudes towards Lincoln, and how all this plays into this, where the game changed. The goalposts get moved back, and now that this all is happening in real time. It's just something to consider when you study the Civil War, is that it's not the blue team versus the gray team, and there's 2 cohesive units fighting each other. You've got all this pissing and moaning and measuring contests back and forth, and we hear a lot about it with Lee and Longstreet. Yeah, you don't hear about it with Meade and Lincoln, like you do with Hooker and Lincoln, right?
But there's a lot going on there, with the politics behind it, and all that. Real quick, Frank is at Spotsylvania Battlefield today.
Attaboy, Frank.
Overland campaign, because it's the 160th anniversary. He's doing Antietam and Gettysburg next week. I did mention to Waterkiller in the chat that James Pullo wrote that really great book about the 11th Corps, but also that Battle of Gettysburg podcast did a 2-part episode with licensed battlefield guide Stu Dempsey about the 11th Corps, which is really good.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, when you study the 11th Corps, you have to step away from the Stephen Sears narrative, right? And you have to be able to look at some of the things. Poole's book, Under the Crescent Moon, it's a 2-volume thing. Yep. It really dispels and dispels that narrative that Barlow, as soon as Early and Gordon arrive at Gettysburg,
Yep.
that they all turn and take off. And if you read Gordon's diary and his memoirs, he talks specifically about how the 11th Corps at Gettysburg fought him harder than any corps he ever fought in the entire war.
Yep.
So they didn't just turn and run. The problem with Gettysburg is Carl Schurz didn't have an escape plan, and they all got lost on the town. And again, that's not Howard again. Howard's in East Cemetery Hill, commanding the army at this point.
Yeah, he's in charge of the whole, and that's something that, a lot of the blame will fall back on Howard. It's like at a certain point, once he finds out that Reynolds is dead, he is no longer in charge of the 11th Corps. Franz Sigel is. So there, or not Franz Sigel, Carl Schurz is. So there has to be all these changes made within the army. So people are going into roles that they're not familiar with. And keep in mind, these guys are humans. They're not like animatronics or whatever at Disney where there's robotic movements. They're
even the West Point guys, don't forget too. At this point, the United States Army is not that big before the war. If you went to West Point, you were probably studying engineering and how to build bridges and build lighthouses. I mean, you could talk about Dennis Mahan and about all those things later on with guys like Clausewitz, and especially people now read. But again, you didn't graduate from West Point and suddenly you were a military genius. A lot of the guys got experience in Mexico for the first time. A lot of guys, they went on the Utah expedition, right? 1850s, and they got some experience there too. But a lot of them, even the generals, were getting experience for the first time when the Civil War happens. And the ones who did study warfare at West Point had to unlearn it as the war changed when it turned from Napoleonic style into trench warfare by 64, 65. And that's what it is. What are you smiling at?
No, just Gentili said, I wish I remember the name of the immigrant from Italy who won the Medal of Honor in an engagement during the Gettysburg campaign. Luigi.
Says Nola.
Remember when we were like talking about him in an episode and you said, oh, we'll get back to him in this episode. We never did.
The future's still wide open, Luigi says Nola. He's up there with the big ones. Gentili's a big proud paisan for that one, right? But again, it is important to talk about, though, and it really, really is. And one thing we noticed when we were doing the episode for Yorktown is you really got to see the Army of Northern Virginia kind of coming together at that point.
That was really interesting how it's like. And Lee at that time is the advisor to Jefferson Davis, and he's telling them, this is what I think you should do. And to see this army all starting to come together, which, as we all know, at Seven Pines, Johnson is going to get wounded, which I think is one of the major for who the generals who get wounded die or whatever. I think that is a huge thing.
Of course, absolutely.
Civil War would have been so much different if he hadn't, I think.
Well, you go from a guy in Joseph E. Johnson who doesn't get enough credit, we've talked about this, who is a absolute defense first guy. He wants to win every football game 10-7. That's who he is. And now you're coming off the peninsula. Now you got Robert E. Lee takes over on June 1st, 1862. And now the narrative flips to offense. Mm-hmm. And McClellan isn't ready for it. And that's credit for Lee. But it's interesting when you read some of McClellan's quotes about Lee during the Yorktown campaign, when there's a rumor floating around in April of 1862 that Robert E. Lee, old granny, who had his problems in what would be West Virginia, is in charge of this Army of Northern Virginia, which is the District of Northern Virginia, realistically at the time, and that everybody says they changed the name of it. But McClellan's ecstatic. He thinks he's slow. He's too cautious. It's the exact opposite of what he is. And this goes to show the reputation of Robert E. Lee at this point is not the reputation that history shows now. Yeah. Robert E. Lee was a guy who thought the parade had passed him by. Mm-hmm. He was an older guy. His hair went totally gray when he was in the mountains of Western Virginia, and he didn't do well. He got a descendant of George Washington killed.
Yeah, I remember we talked about that in the episode we did.
And a lot of people looked at him as kind of your old grandfather who just was he wasn't that old, but
Granny Lee.
But that's how it comes from. So before June of 62, he's a military advisor to Jeff Davis. He basically is in charge of the defenses of Richmond and some of the coastal defenses around Norfolk. That's what his job was. But he always had Jefferson Davis's ear.
Mhm.
And so as soon as he went down, eventually he's going to take over and he's going to basically flip that narrative to the 7 Days campaign,
Yeah.
which he'll then play into Second Manassas, and off he goes, and the rest is history. But if you can go back into you can jump in your DeLorean, Mary, and go 88 miles an hour and go back to May of 1862, and you were to stumble out of one of the bars in Richmond, you would have asked them what they thought of Robert E. Lee.
It would not be good.
You would not get a favorable opinion.
No.
But that was the reality. But he changed all that, obviously, with 7 Days.
Yeah, but Frank's at the bloody angle right now, by the way.
I'll tell you right, that Spotsylvania, I'm gonna guess that there's nobody there, Frank, that you're probably by yourself, because that's the way it always is. Go find the stump that was shot. That's in that if you go to the Smithsonian, the actual stump is there full of bullet holes. But there's a stump that that was shot down during the Battle of Spotsylvania. It's now, and there was a marker on it that someone stole the marker. Because now it's it's filled with cement now. But you can see that part in the ground that's still there. And if you go to the Smithsonian, you can see the other half. It's pretty cool. But make sure you go to the Confederate cemetery around the corner from there. It's really, really cool. And obviously you go see all this, to see the Sedgwick Wounding Monument.
Yeah. But
Spotsylvania, as far as a vista, is spectacular.
Yeah.
And walk across that field. And it's probably wet now, but if you walk all the way, if you're at the bloody angle and you see that big field in front of you, you can walk to the woods where Barlow and Hancock are the ones who came out of the woods right there, where that picket line is, and you can see some breastworks there too. So go check that out.
Yeah, yeah. Michael just said, like, to Frank, like, walk Upton's assault. We did that.
Remember we did that? We were running down the.
Had the sword.
Henry Upton.
Yeah.
We visited his grave. He's buried not far from Harriet Tubman.
Yeah.
Over there in Auburn.
Yeah, that was really cool seeing that.
Yeah. That's fun.
Just one thing I thought of, I realized this when I was doing the research for the episode that we just did about Siege of Yorktown, but there was one really great article I read that talks kind of about what McClellan's mindset is going into this. And like, this is not a good moment for McClellan. This is where he gets that reputation of being slow, that reputation. People start to take what happened at Siege of Yorktown, though, and apply it to Antietam. And McClellan at Antietam is a bit different than the McClellan we see at Siege of Yorktown.
Yeah, and that's a cult of personality and history memory thing. Is all you if you read and you talk to people about Antietam, you talk about McClellan, especially post Antietam, those couple of days after they conveniently forget about the Battle of Shepherdstown and forget about what he did at Williamsburg, another story. But a lot of the quotes you hear people ripping on McClellan they're talking about Yorktown, but they attribute it to Antietam. Especially a lot of the quotes, the article to Lincoln about if he wants me to chase Lee, tell him to do it himself.
Yeah.
That quote, that's not Antietam, that's Yorktown.
Yeah.
And he's talking to Lincoln about taking Yorktown. But that's the thing. And so again, McClellan, I think he doesn't deserve a lot of the crap he gets, especially Lost Order 191, especially Maryland. But this one he does. And this is the one that sticks because it's early. Because remember, too, you still have a 2-to-1 advantage on the peninsula after he falls back. He parlays that into losing 7 days and getting driven off the peninsula. Now, admittedly, he loses that McDowell division we talked about that Lincoln gave him to go chase Stonewall in the Valley. So he thinks he has less men. But for whatever reason, guys like Pinkerton and Fitzjohn Porter keep drilling into his head this overreaching number the Confederates have, and he believes it. Yeah. Despite the fact that people like Baldy Smith, Winfield Scott Hancock, are telling him otherwise. He believes these people. You've got Thaddeus Lowe's flying up and down in the balloon. He's not seeing anybody. Maybe they were ghost soldiers, Mary. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's the shadow figures. The ghost of Yorktown. Somebody get Mark Nesbitt on the phone. Maybe he can set up a satellite office, right? But that's what he's thinking, though. And if you're being told you got to defend Washington and defend Baltimore, and you're getting mixed information, of course you're going to be cautious. But when you got your own subordinates like Baldy Smith telling you, dude, there's nobody here. Let's get that right flank at Lee's Mill right now. Dam number 1's wide open. Let's just go take it. We can flank them now. And he goes, nope, we're sieging them. So he's getting conflicting info. But again, the arrogance is what gets him. Is he
Oh,
thinks he's
he's
the
so
he thinks he's the
he's
smart he
very
thinks he's the smartest guy in the room.
he's
Maybe he's
very
getting maybe he's getting a PhD somewhere. Who knows? But
um Michael Lenz asked, how much of our memory of McClellan is influenced by the rhetoric surrounding the 1864 election and challenging Lincoln, and how much of our memory is influenced by his letters that were made public? Both those things go into the memory. It's also the way that certain authors do write about him as well. Specifically, Stephen Sears does not have
yeah,
a very favorable opinion. And I mean, I like what I recommend Stephen Sears books to people all the time because they're a great resource for Antietam, for Gettysburg. I don't
okay.
agree with him on McClellan or what he says about Howard,
Well,
though.
Lance makes a good point. And this whole thing is
Yeah.
like, well, what did McClellan do? He went after the sacred cow. He went after Lincoln,
Yeah.
right? Now, again, Lincoln wasn't Lincoln then either. He had a lot of distractors. As the war went on, don't forget too, you lose New Jersey and you lose states like that to Democratic governors during the
Yeah.
war. Pennsylvania, everyone thinks of Curtin, but the Congress was Democrat. New York is now a Democrat controlled state. So you had a lot of the Copperhead phenomenon, which was kind of chipping away at the Lincoln personality. But the problem with McClellan is he writes that 500-page piss
Oh,
on
yeah.
letter,
Yeah.
ripping everything possible about Lincoln, right? And then he runs against him. So you know the Lincoln community better than I do.
Mm.
Okay. There are people who think Lincoln never swore.
Yeah.
Okay. And to this day, so back then, if you're really supporting Lincoln, and now Lincoln, you run against Lincoln, you lose.
Yeah.
Now Lincoln's killed on Good Friday, and everything happens with that cult of personality with Lincoln. A lot of it's deserved, but a lot of it is just is historical memory. It makes McClellan look worse and worse and worse because if Lincoln is held to such a high level, and you've got all these letters attacking him, he's an easy target.
Yeah.
We see it on a smaller scale with the Rosecrans Grant thing,
Yep.
right? But that's where it comes from. But people forget about the fact of what a shambles that Army of the Potomac was after Second Manassas,
Yep.
after John Pope, and he's able to flip that around in such a short period of time to drive Lee back to Virginia at Antietam.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
and by the way, he does act aggressively afterwards at Shepherdstown. He blocks Lee's second plan to cross at Williamsport because Lee wasn't designing to fall back after Antietam and go back home. He was going to circle around and come back. McClellan wisely noticed that and blocked all of his roads, so he had to fall back.
Yeah.
But again, it's all politics. You mentioned this before. It's politics. They were
Yep.
different ends of the spectrum,
Yep.
and that's why he gets ripped on. And authors like Sears, admittedly, jump on that, especially with the Maryland campaign. We saw with Nathan Kimball's letters in Lost
Yep.
Order 191 to paint this. He sat on his ass for 16 hours. Well, the soldiers fighting at South Mountain probably wondered where that 16 hours was because they were already there fighting and they were set
Yep.
there. So again, that's part of it, and
Yeah.
that's why you got to read as much as you can.
Yeah. And when I first started studying the Civil War, like, you know, I remember not liking McClellan very much. I'd read some Lincoln biographies and they're never favorable to him. And just, reading Sears and all that. And then I started to look at it more and I started to think, why does this guy have such a bad reputation? And then you start learning how the narrative has been spun with the election, with that, he's a Democrat, Lincoln's a Republican, but there's so many Democrats in the Union Army too. Reynolds, Meade, there's quite a few of them. You do have the Republicans, like I think Sedgwick, right? No, not Sedgwick.
Well, Howard was the only
Doubleday.
right.
Howard is the only, like one of the only like Truda, like kind of he's close to being an abolitionist, but he's very quiet about it, I think, because he got beat up at West Point for it. But the one thing that I read about McClellan, and this does not get talked about a lot, is that when he was over in Europe, he sees what happens at Sevastopol, and I'm probably butchering that name,
No,
but
you got it right.
it was really bad. Like, so he saw the dead bodies, he saw the wounded soldiers, he saw, how the women are being, women and children, they're being widowed, kids are losing their fathers. It was really horrific. And he's introduced to that horrific side of war. And I think it left a scar on him. Like, I think it would on anybody, but he writes it. And knowing that, when you read some of the stuff he said about his soldiers, the one statement he makes them where I am your father, I'm going to look after you. He that goes back to what he witnessed at Sevastopol. And again, human. He's affected by what he sees there, and he doesn't want to see his soldiers killed and maimed in what he saw at Sevastopol. Now, is that good for a commander of an army to do? No, but again, Colin is not a robot. He's a human. And to, he says he does make mention a few times in his letters, oh, I got this with very few people being killed. So he's about protecting his soldiers. He's great at organizing the army. He knows what the army has to do. But his thing in his head is like, I don't want these guys to get killed and maimed from what I saw. So I think it's like, he's really struggling with that. And I think that really did get in his way.
It did.
That was a struggle for him, but it doesn't excuse what he does at Yorktown. But when you're looking at him, I think you have to keep in mind that's one of the things that is in his head. That is his struggle, is that he's seen some pretty bad shit. And probably more so than some of the other commanders have seen at that point. This is 6.5 years prior to the Civil War. But when I read that, it kind of gave me kind of this other perspective for how McClellan is thinking. Again, it does not excuse what he does at Yorktown. And yes, he's arrogant in his letters. His letters to his wife are actually really fun. They are a fun read. He is like, he's so arrogant. But you know what, McClellan, as far as generals go, I do like him. I love studying him. He's a great study, and I think he is very much not deserving of a lot of the shit he gets, especially surrounding Antietam and Order 191. But Yorktown is justified. But
yeah, and you're right. You're protecting the troops. I mean, when Joseph E. Johnson was at Manassas and he left, and because he falls back south of the Rappahannock, and then as soon as St. Patty's 1862, it's finally when McClellan leaves Alexandria, he takes a victory lap over Johnson leaving, pulling out of Manassas without a shot, and he takes credit for it. And he says it's a glorious event and all that stuff. And then he talks about how he only lost one guy in this thing. So you're right. He's about protecting, but also too, he needs people in this army. They're recruiting. He's not going to sit there and say, God, I saw Johnny's head get blown off today. That sucked. He's going to sit there and say, I'm protecting everybody. Because we talk about this, especially when you mentioned the Irish. People who were signed after First Manassas, especially the Irish, they saw what happened, and they go back to places like Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia, right? And they're like, well, if you're thinking of signing up, I got advice to you, don't. Because you're going to be treated like a dog. And so McClellan is fighting that tide of recruiting anyway. So of course he's going to talk about he's going to be sunshine.com with everything. That right? because
you'll see a picture of McClellan. Is McClellan the you remember the sunshine thing for the Teletubbies? Is that McClellan's face in there? Do you remember that?
It's not bullets falling, it's lead sunshine. Sign up and join us. It's a lot of fun. But he has to do that though. But he has to put this army together because he saw what happened with Irvin McDowell at First Manassas. They got astroglided because they weren't ready. So he's going to fall back to Alexandria and build this army, get him ready to fight. And he creates this monster that sails down the Potomac, down to Fort Monroe. He divides the army into 3 corps at this part of it. He's got a good group. He's got good people. And now he's going to slowly start to work up the peninsula. The peninsula, like we said in the episode, is like Long Island with New York City at the other end. And you're coming from the Hamptons. You're working your way west. And you're going against those John Magruder, those 3 lines, Big Bethel, right? Warwick line we talked about. And then at the end where Fort Magruder is. So and he's filling with rifle pits and he's doing everything he can with only 12,000 guys to stop 50, 60, eventually 70,000 troops coming. Not to mention the navies. You have the York River. You're basically surrounded by 2 different rivers, the James and the York, where the Confederates have to worry about their flanks being hit by Union gunboats now. And again, Magruder does not get enough credit for this. And this is a guy who people love. They call him Prince John because he had a great personality. He was
very flamboyant. I
You
don't know.
know,
I just pictured
probably
him like
probably did magic tricks. Who knows what he did?
I just pictured him as being like Kramer from that episode where he dressed up like the pimp. That's the image I have of him in my mind. There's a battlefield question for you. Mike said he's going to be in Fredericksburg this week. How close is Chancellorsville battlefield and what areas should he check out?
From Fredericksburg,
Yeah, he's
it's
going to be in
probably about
Fredericksburg.
45 minutes. Here's what you got to do. You drive down the Orange Plank Road. Okay, you're going to get to Salem Church. Stop there first, because that's where when the Union was going down towards Chancellorsville,
Mhm.
there was Confederate pickets there, and there's a battle. And if you go to Salem Church, you can see all the bullet holes still in the church. There's a
Yeah.
big marker there, and you go visit that first. And then you bear left and you head into Chancellorsville. It's probably about 40 minutes to get from there, but don't miss Salem Church on the way, because it's right on the way. You can't miss it. Definitely hit that. And when you go to Chancellorsville, the first thing you gotta do is you gotta know the battle, because Chancellorsville in the wilderness are two different battles a year apart, and so you'll see markers to Robert E. Lee, and you'll see markers to U.S. Grant right next to each other, and it gets confusing if you don't. But I'm sure you know the battles, but definitely check it out. Give yourself as much time as you can. You want to go to the campsite where Lee and Jackson met, and you want to follow that road past Catherine Furnace, right? And you want to go to Fairview, and you want to go to Hazel Grove, and you want to see everything, but give yourself a lot of time. And most important, Mary, go to 1781 Brewery.
Yes, that place
because
is amazing.
not only could you get good beer there, but that's the site where Stonewall got his arm taken off, right at the brewery. And then you go across the street to Elwood, and you go see the marker where his arm is buried at Elwood Plantation. But there's a lot of stuff you can do. It's a great area. You can make sure you go to Todd's Tavern, which is just basically a convenience store right now, but it's an aspect of the Battle of Chancellorsville that a lot of people don't visit. But I love it. Chancellorsville, if you I've been a handful of times. It's a great visit.
It's so good.
But you want to go to Saunders Field at Wilderness, because you can all do it together. Give yourself a good couple of days though, because you can't see it all. But there's a lot of cool places to go. But it's a long answer to a short question. But don't miss Salem Church. Everyone misses Salem Church on the way. It's a cool.
It's such a and Fredericksburg is I mean, there's not a lot of Fredericksburg left, unfortunately, but it's still worth it to explore there as well. And MJ said that she likes McClellan and she encourages people to read the newer research, and specifically the book about, I think it was Alex Racino wrote about Order 191.
Yeah, I mean that book's pretty good. I mean, there are other ones that are good too, but I think what you really got to do is go back and understand some of the embellishments that was done anti-McClellan. And a lot of the shit that came out about McClellan 191, for example, came out after the war.
Yeah.
When that whole anti-Lincoln narrative thing was going too. So it was a pig pile. There are newspaper people who specifically were writing articles after the war, embellishing stuff that happened early in the war to really stick it to McClellan.
Yeah.
Think of today's modern politics. It's the same exact thing. But the thing is, a lot of it's stuck. A lot of it's stuck. And that's where the narrative comes from. But he deserves a lot of it. I'm not going to sit here and paint a picture that McClellan walks on water here. It's all soft serving sunshine in Macland.
Yeah.
But the reality is there's two sides to every story, and a lot of it's over the top.
It's a lot like I know Waterkiller, he's on here from Germany. He mentioned he really likes Rosecrans, one of his favorites. And we're team Rosecrans here too. He is one that, I mean, Rosecrans is not perfect, but he also has this reputation, and a lot of it is, yes, thanks to U.S. Grant. I love Grant. He's awesome, but he did not do Rosecrans any favors. And like Rosecrans is a guy who, the Tullahoma campaign is brilliant. But by the time he gets to Chickamauga, as we've mentioned many times, he is not the same Rosecrans that he was.
No, his mental tires were bald by the time he got to Tullahoma after.
Yeah.
I mean, that happened. If you read Rufus Dawes' diary, 6 Wisconsin, one of the best firsthand accounts of the Civil War. Not up there with Abner Small, but it's close. He's good. You can see the cheese falling off his cracker as the war goes on too. He rises second Manassas. He's freaking Batman, right?
Yeah.
After Gettysburg, he's a shell of what he was. It's sad, but they think he's the first documented case of PTSD in American history. Was Rufus Dawes, and that doesn't mean by any stretch he was the first one to have it.
No,
if you read the Dawes diary, and from beginning to end, you see it's like written by two different guys by the
Yeah.
time you get to the end. And
Yeah.
he writes it all real time.
The end when he's, he's writing about being at Arlington and he's reflecting on how, well, this is where we met at the beginning of the Civil War and all these guys were alive and now they're buried here. And, and he's
Mhm.
basically saying, why am I not here? Why wasn't it me?
The thing about it though is when you study the war, I mean, it's good. It's great. There's chances of talk because of the anniversary, but too many times people study this war in a vacuum. They look
Yep.
at Gettysburg, they look at Chancellorsville, they look at Fredericksburg, and in the Civil War is a war of campaigns from beginning to the end. But you see the mindset change. If you really want to understand the big boys like Gettysburg,
Yep.
and you can learn a lot about Gettysburg by studying battles like the Wilderness
Yep.
afterwards, because the learnings they go. Jim Hessler just did a tour of the Wilderness,
Yep.
and what's great about Jim, and everyone knows Jim Hessler from Gettysburg Battle of Gettysburg podcast, and he's a guide and all that. But he does other things. He's not a one
Yes.
trick pony where he just studies like Gettysburg. He realizes that you can learn a lot more about the war and about that battle by studying the bigger battles.
Yep.
His fascination with guys like Custer is why he does tours at Little Bighorn, right?
Yeah.
And if you really want to like we said before, if you want to learn Gettysburg and you really want to learn Gettysburg, study Second Winchester,
Yeah.
right? And because you'll learn a lot about the mindset of what Richard Ewell in his first real job as Corps commander now, right? How he's going to take that learning and how he's going to play that into what's going to turn into the Gettysburg campaign. When he
Yeah.
beats up Milroy, chases him back to Harper's Ferry, how he doesn't chase after Harper's Ferry because he doesn't have those direct orders to, because he's used to getting those specific orders directly from Stonewall Jackson. Now he's going to think on his own. Oh, by the way, the big man Lee doesn't give you direct orders either. He's a macro
Yeah.
guy. So you can see why doesn't Ewell take that hill and all that crap that comes up to
Yep.
Gettysburg. You'll learn about a lot of that stuff by what happens after his victory at Second Winchester.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's
So
really,
that,
and like Michael Lentz says, like, yes, preach, context is the key to understanding Gettysburg.
yeah. And the thing about, and you can't, so many people in this book, I think because of the movie specifically, and
Yes.
they think the armies just appear on
Yep.
July 1st, and then July 3rd, they disappear and they leave. The sweet part of Gettysburg is from June 3rd to July 1st, and then
Yep.
from July 4th up until July 13th, 14th, when Lee crosses over back into Virginia again.
Yep.
But especially the lead up. And you find out a lot about what makes these armies tick. The armies didn't meet on the march like sometimes you hear,
No.
right? Because they both roughly knew. Lee was just surprised, and vice versa, where the army were, but they all knew Gettysburg was going to be the place.
Mhm.
But when you realize that Gettysburg was really a big shopping trip to supply the Army of Northern Virginia,
Yeah.
and then you find out all those false, lazy narratives about Jeb Stuart that get
Yeah.
played in the movie, it all makes a lot more sense. But a lot of that can be learned by studying Second Winchester on.
Yeah.
You want to study not just Brandy Station. You want to do AMU, Aldie, Middleburg, Upperville, with
Yeah.
the cavalry.
Those are
Because
Gentili's favorite Western
Right,
theater battles.
right. Because it teaches you so much about how the armies got there and the mindset and the psychology of what it was when they got there, right?
Yeah.
If Heath is going into Gettysburg to take care of militia, why the hell does he bring his 8,000-man division, all his artillery, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing, and all those questions can be answered during the lead up, which is why it's great to study that stuff. And if you're going to take the guide exam, for example, learn the pre and the post, because it'll help
It's
you
so
understand
important.
it.
Yeah.
Right. Because Gettysburg is a campaign and it's a lead up and a postscript. Right. You want to study Bristow Station afterwards. You find out the postscript to Gettysburg and how they come back up again. That's what's great about it, is there's so much that goes into it. But the big battles, you can learn so much about the lead up to them that helps you understand the big boys. Every volcano has tremors leading up to it before the big blast. And that's what these battles are, why it's so important to learn them.
Yeah, you can't, and it's the same with studying like the Western theater, like the Vicksburg campaign, that siege and all that. There's all these little battles. And it also teaches you about the individuals that are there.
Right.
Sherman does not, there's a few times he does not have a great day in the Vicksburg campaign, specifically Chickasaw Bayou. It's terrible for him. But he learns from that. And also looking at something like, oh God, what was that campaign he did where it was like his test run for the March to the Sea? It's
The
escaping me.
Meridian campaign.
Meridian campaign. If you look at the Meridian campaign, that is a very small scale March to the Sea. And at that point, Sherman is testing the waters to see, hey, if we can do this on a small scale, can we do this on a large scale?
And you know what else he learned in Meridian campaign? You have to have adults in the room with you. Because Meridian campaign, he has William Suey Smith.
That is such a joke.
Who
looks
has
like Shaggy.
Right. Who's doing a lot, humping parking meters along the way. He's doing everything that he could do wrong to cause problems in that area in Mississippi. So when he brings in his March of the Sea, he's going to bring in Howard, right? Because he's going to have somebody who's going to have to basically be the adult. And so all these are learnings from different previous battles. And these are people too. And we saw how people changed throughout the war. How specifically how Hooker was at Chancellorsville is not how he was when we saw him later on at Chattanooga, right?
Yep. And so many, or Wild Man's New Life, for instance, Brandy Station, there were so many horses there.
Brandy Station's cool because the Jeb Stuart people don't like to talk about Brandy Station because he had his grand review and he ended up getting pants by Pleasanton of all freaking people, right? But the thing
Most
about it though,
face in the Civil War,
right? But that kind of put the cavalry on equal ground. But really, it was East Cavalry Field and Dave McMurtry Gregg that really put them on even ground, because when you think about the fact that you have brand new Cavalier generals, guys like Wesley Merritt, guys like Judson Kilpatrick, who get put in charge, obviously George Custer, who get put in charge 3 days before too. Meade gets the big man chair, and he gets permission to change and promote anybody who he wants. So he's going to put Kilpatrick, Wesley Merritt, and George Custer as generals right off the bat. Guys like Custer take it to like fish to water. He's going to give advice to guys like David Mercury Gregg, guys like Judson Kilpatrick on the very understudied South Cavalry field, right? Who gets Elon Farnsworth killed. He didn't learn from it, right? He has a success at Battle of Hanover, Huntersville, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But at Two Taverns the night before, right, on July 2nd, he somehow inexplicably sends Custer over to the other end and leaves him there. And he doesn't have Merritt under his control. He's with the Buford and the U.S. guys. So there's that change of command in there. When they go ahead and fight on July 3rd, afterwards, it's all screwed up. And anybody who goes to Gettysburg, way more than they should, like us, go to the South Cavalry Field. Go to the 1st West Virginia.
Yeah.
Learn the guys, William Wills. Go to guys like that and study that aspect of the field. And if you go behind that where the dinosaur bridge is, if you get there, before you get there, you go to the right, you're going to see a perfect original wall that Kilpatrick's cavalry fought behind and they rallied behind. And no one ever visits this because you drive by, you don't see it.
Yeah.
And there's a great monument to the 5th New York that's up there that no one ever goes to. And you can see a lot of that, but a lot of that comes out of that change of command that Meade puts in. And it goes to show how these people are putting charge. It's like going from 1st grade to high school.
Oh yeah,
for these guys.
And
as far as going from being a captain to a general almost overnight, and studying that, it brings so much more into context that battle when you study it, because you're learning. These people are learning on the fly.
Yeah,
as is Meade. If you think about it, he goes from 5th Corps to the big man chair overnight.
Yeah, he's a big boy, and he's running an army.
I'm a big boy.
Running the army. So Michael says, Henry McClellan, cousin to George, wrote that Brandy Station made the Union cavalry. And he says, I would expand that to say Gettysburg campaign as a whole did. I would say there was a definite change.
Well, that's what we just said. Yeah. Brandy Station was the first time where Stuart kind of got pushed back. It could have been a lot worse for Stuart. But the Rebs lived to fight another day.
Yeah.
Aldie, Middleburg, and Upperville kind of expanded on that. But like we just said, East Cavalry Field is really when Stewart got really pushed back, because he had Wade Hampton with him.
Yeah.
I mean, he had good guys who were fighting up there in East Calvary Field. But again, Dave McMurtry Gregg is the one who really deserves a lot of credit for that too.
Run DMG, as you call him.
Run DMG, and he certainly does. And even Pleasanton. I mean, he had a Breakerhoff Ridge. I mean, they had their moments.
Yeah.
But really, it was McMurtry Gregg who really deserves a lot of the credit, because that was the point there when Jeb Stewart probably finally did learn that these guys aren't, they're not equals to us now, but they can swing with us now. Yeah. And he got his first taste of it at Brandy Station. But again, I think if the Confederates really went all in, they would have pushed them back.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
But it was East Calvary Field for the most part that it really changed. And that part of it was. Yeah. But again, Kilpatrick didn't do all that great on the other side of the battlefield. He really didn't. You're basically fighting against green troops. You're going to have the 1st Texas fall back from Devil's Den, who's going to help slow them down. Is going to help get Farnsworth killed. Guys like Oates, 15th Alabama, 1st Alabama, they're going to end up, a 4th Alabama rather, are going to help fall into that. But again, on East Calvary Field, you really saw a situation where Jeb got his crap pushed in.
Oh yeah, he definitely did. And to Calvary regarding, I definitely agree that this is when the Union cavalry kind of comes in, they come into their own, that they're good now, that they're not lagging behind the Confederates like they were. But if you look at the cavalry out in the Western Theater, that is something else too. Ben Grierson and his guys, holy, the real horse soldiers, that whole thing, they're really good. But then you also have in the Western Theater, you have the mounted infantry, which men like Wilder, who study John T. Wilder. That guy is he's so interesting. And his grave is you would not know it's the mayor of Chattanooga and the guy that is helping to save Rosecrans's army going into Chickamauga, or on the first day of Chickamauga. He has this idea well, why don't I mount my infantry with these awesome new, Spencer repeaters? And Washington's no, we're not going to buy those for you. And John T. Wilder's fine, I'll fund it myself. And he does. Washington does pay him back once they realize how good the Spencers are. But that's what he uses at Chickamauga. And that's how he's able to keep, hold off the rebels for long enough to basically Bragg has one plan going into September the 18th, 1863 for Chickamauga. And by that night, he's well, back to the drawing board. I have to change my whole plan because the Union totally screwed it up for me.
Well, we saw with Custer and the Michiganders. Is that what a French?
Yeah, Michiganders.
Michigan men, right? Where they're fighting the Confederates at the Rebel Farm, East Calvary Field. And they have those repeaters, and rebels hadn't really seen those before. So that's a big part of it. And then later on, you have the big charge of Jeb Stewart. They hit that fence and they stop and they're fighting each other. But yeah, cavalry doesn't get a lot of talk when you're talking specifically Gettysburg. But
Michael says he likes Ben Grierson. He's name drop, let's go.
No, Grierson's great because he's a guy who, I don't want to say imposter syndrome a little bit. He basically ends up in a situation where he joins the army and he doesn't feel like he's a teacher, probably doesn't feel like he really belongs. But then when they land at Bruinsburg, go Bruins, by the way, I don't think that's going to fucking work out. But in any case, they land at Bruinsburg and Vicksburg, and he goes and he makes that run towards Jackson and causes all those problems to the point when he's legitimately causing a pucker effect moment with Joseph E. Johnson and Pemberton and Vicksburg, right?
Well, Tim Smith put it perfectly. Grierson was making him be like a bobblehead, looking where is Grierson now? Where is he going?
What he was doing was the same thing that John Mosby was doing in Virginia on the Union side, where he was causing fear. He was creating this cult of personality. There was this monster out there. We don't know where the hell he is, but we see him, and that's what he did. Grierson deserves so much credit. Not only the odds of him pulling that off and getting his ass back were 1,000 to 1, and he pulled it off to the point when Pemberton is sitting down going, okay, where is this Grierson? He's sitting there in Vicksburg. He's not worried about Grant knocking on his door with artillery. He's worried about Ben Grierson, okay, who looks like Spicoli from Fast Time at Ridgemont High, for God's sake. He's perma high. If you look at his pictures. but that's who he's worried about.
Yeah.
So Grierson is the Horse Soldier movie is, I don't,
I mean,
people
it's
like it.
loosely based.
I mean, yeah, it's not the best movie in the world, but at the end of the day, it does give a feeling of
Yeah. The
what
Real
he
Horse
did.
Soldiers by Tim Smith is amazing. That book, I love
Speaking of
that
Tim
book.
Smith, he'll be coming on to our book
He
club here in a
will.
few
Yes,
months. We'll talk about that.
announcing that date
But
soon.
his real book, his book, The Real Horse Soldiers, is the gold standard for books on Ben Grierson.
Yeah.
If you like Ben Grierson, you read that book, you're gonna love Ben Grierson. So
Yeah.
I would definitely read that.
I just put it in the chat by Tim Smith. It's really, really, really good.
Yeah.
I really like he was great to have on the book club too, but it's just like, we try to have like, because there are a couple book clubs that are like our friend MJ and Andrea Quinn have a book club with their Gettysburg These On Our Dead Facebook page. And Addressing Gettysburg has a book club as well. And those books, especially in MJ's, tend to be more Gettysburg focused. So we try to do books that like, look more at the Western Theater, look at different people. Like we had Craig Simons on for Patrick Claiborne, which was awesome. It's like such a fun, like it's really a fun thing, and it gets you reading different stuff too. Oh, Bjorn's on here from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop.
You know why? Because he heard books and his bat signal went
Yes,
off.
there's actually a new book out about about Fort Sumter by Eric Larson.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go look it up because I know Bjorn has it at the bookshop.
Hey, Bjorn, do you have a book about how the Red Sox beat the Cubs 17-0 last weekend? I'm just curious. I'm just curious if Cub fan Bjorn has a book about that one. Anyway, no, but that's the place for books. And in Tim Smith's book, and you mentioned he's got obviously a relationship with Bjorn.
Yeah.
He's fantastic, and we had him on. He was funny because he reminds me a little bit when we had Gelzo on, where you could go on and on and on. It's like sitting in a bar with someone just shooting the shit about this stuff for hours. Yeah. And he was one that when we cut it off, he was disappointed.
He was like, I could have kept going.
And when we had Gelzo on a week or two ago, we shut the video off and we went for like a half hour, 40 minutes.
I know, we were just talking.
I'm kicking myself because he had the best opinion of Chamberlain in a Little Round Top that I wish we got on the air. It
was like just like when we brought up Chamberlain, he's like, oh no.
Because we have a very similar mindset on Joshua Chamberlain as far as the publicity about everything. And here and talk about it, just not talk about just some of the stuff with that and the movie in the book. It's fascinating when you talk to these people who really know their stuff. Whether you agree with their opinions or not doesn't matter.
It still is a great.
But it's the knowledge. Obviously, I agree with them on Chamberlain. I mean, I nothing against Joshua Chamberlain. I just think that what he did a Little Round Top is one of the most important things that happened. But it's not the only thing that happened. Yeah. And I think because of the book and because of the movie, it deflects away from other people. Not just at Ireland, we talk about him, but also guys like Colville, First Minnesota, this 19th Maine, all the things that went on the Battle of Gettysburg. Obviously 16th Maine, Charles Tilden, all these things that happened that didn't get in the book or didn't get in the movie that people. My friend Doug is down staying at the house in Gettysburg right now, and I text him in real time of where he's going, what he should do, and he's amazed at how, and he likes history, but he's amazed at how much stuff went on there that he never realized, and how anybody who appreciates history, whether you're a history Civil War buff or you don't know it at all, you got to go to Gettysburg because you learn so much about today's culture from that battle.
Yeah.
And of all the battlefields, that's the one that seems to resonate more with
it definitely does. And Bjorn mentions I'm writing that Cubs book now since I'm a White Sox fan. I think Darren will like it. He's a White Sox fan. He's not a Cubs fan.
Oh, really? Oh, I don't. I apologize to you, Bjorn.
Elsie is the Cubs fan. Elsie's on here. And Bjorn
I don't know why the hell I thought he was a Cubs fan. I thought he was. But I apologize then, and I apologize for your White Sox, by the way. Oh my God.
I'm sorry for what the Indians did. I think the Indians.
Yeah, but it was. But
Bjorn mentions William and Shirley Lecky wrote Unlikely Warriors, which is a biography about the Grierson family. Yeah, that would be an interesting read. And the book by Eric Larson that just came out, which is about It's about Charleston, Fort Sumter, Charleston, South Carolina. And he discusses the single most consequential day in American history is called the Demon of Unrest. And Erik Larson is a great author. I've read his book about the Lusitania, and it was
Mhm.
so good. And he wrote one about I think it was called Devil in the White City, about the serial killer in Chicago. I'm just off the top of my head. But I think this book about the Demon of Unrest about Fort Sumter, I think that'll be a really good read. And I know Bjorn has it for sale at Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. Got so much cool stuff there. Definitely check them out. Michael Lenz mentions my history brain mixes up Charles Tilden and Samuel Tilden, which is not a good sign for the LBG exam. Bjorn, the White Sox need the Benny Hill soundtrack this year.
Yeah, it's the White Sox. No, but the Tildens are definitely want to miss those ones up too. But that's good. That's good. He's taking that Mike's taking the test. I'm sure he'll pass it. He knows the stuff, and he's a good presenter too. And that's really key to the whole thing. You can have all the knowledge in the world if you sound like you're reading stereo instructions. No, don't forget too, when you're giving tours, you're not giving tours to Gettysburg Civil War buffs. You're giving tours to Cub Scout troops and couples from Iowa and people who. So you have to make it entertaining. So, and he'll do a good job with that. And I think I'm sure I'll look for when he passes his test. We'll have to definitely go take one of his tests. We'll have to go more of his tours for him. And I'll probably do that test in a couple of years. The timing's not going to work out this time.
Jim Miller mentions that Devil in the White City is the book about the first documented serial killer in the United States. And it's really good. Erik Larson is a great author, so I really want to read his book about Fort Sumter, because he just it's like his book about the Lusitania. I listened to the audiobook. It was like a movie.
So, Tilden, he was he the one who was the serial killer in Chicago who brought the people, like it was like a fun house and he did medical exams on them?
Yeah, pretty sure that's it.
Because there were rumors. Did I say that's maybe I'm mixing my carrots and my peas here, but
there's rumors that he was Jack the Ripper.
Jack the Ripper, right? Okay, I know who he is now. Yeah, that's and I think the site of that I believe is gone now, but I think there's still a little area of grass that was the site of the warehouse where he brought his people in. Yeah, it's a spooking. It was like the Chicago Fair or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. Jim just suggests.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a thing. But no, but for real, but that's the thing too, is learning these stuff and being able to tell their stories on a personal level. At the end of the day, you want to tell a story and have someone who has no idea about it go, oh, that was really cool. I didn't know that.
You want to make those human, you want to kind of get to know your audience and find out, well, what are you interested in? All this other stuff, and kind of somehow make that connection with them. I mean, one of my favorite things is kind of, I don't know, I'm obsessed with knowing the names of horses. I'm obsessed with knowing if people had dogs. I can tell like Howard was a dog person, because he, in his letters, he will ask the kid about the kids they had pet dogs, but he also tells his kids about dogs. There was the letter he wrote on April 9th, 1865 to his son, and he drew a picture of the dog with his left hand. He was quite good at penmanship. Like, he had to learn again. Imagine having to learn how to write. You lose your arm and you have to learn how to write. Drew a picture of the dog, and that is just such a human side to it, that he's writing his kid and saying, oh, we have a dog, and this is the dog, draws a picture of it, and then he will ask the kids, how's the dog doing? Which is, I don't know, that's just so interesting to me, this human side of it.
Scooby's a dog that talks, but he really talks. That's an inside story from years ago. But no, that's a cool thing though. But being able to juggle this stuff, because it's hard. A lot of these guys, in real time, being away from their families, and that's if you read the diaries, that's the most common thing you hear about is the families, missing their spouses, their girlfriends, both, whatever it happens to be in that situation.
Yeah. And the other thing too, speaking of missing them, Howard has to answer his son, I can't come home right now. There's too much going on, because his son wrote him and said, when are you coming back for a visit? And Howard said, I can't. There's too much going on.
That's the hard thing is putting these people in real lives, because don't forget too, a lot of these people, they signed up for a short period of time. It'd be fun to get out of the state for a while. Most people in that era, 1800s, they never went out of their town, let alone their state. Now you got
Yeah.
people from Massachusetts and Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont going to places like Virginia, right? Where they never would have visited their lives ever before. And now they're going to pay me to go visit and go check out some stuff. And maybe I'll get a pension out of it too.
Yeah.
I'll get paid. It's a job. And they didn't realize what they were getting themselves into. And
No,
then
no.
when they were in it, they were stuck. And we were talking before, someone had asked that German question about the South. You're 1862, March, April, around there. Now you're getting conscripted. You sign 1 year papers, and now overnight you're being told they're 3 year papers, or when the war ends, whatever takes the
Yep.
longest time. And then the Confederates like, well, I'll tell you, here's what we're going to do though to make things better. We're going to let you elect your officers. We're like, okay. So I'm stuck here, but I get to just determine who the captain is in my company, and that's so they were trying these little things to try to get to stay with it. But by the time we get post 63, 64, when we talk with Dr. Carmichael, when we had him on back in the day here, is the number of people, the shirkers and the runaways.
Yeah.
We
Oh,
talk
the
about
Futch letters. That is such a sad story.
the Futch letters, who they finally had enough and they took off and they got caught and they got shot in front of their entire regiment for being deserters. And all the letters that in his book, Stories of the Common Soldier, the book he
Yeah.
wrote
More for
recently,
the
right?
common soldier. Yeah.
When you read the letters of what the Futches dealt with before that, and they're writing home, begging for furloughs, begging to go, and they finally left, and they got caught and made an example of. And he's so vivid, the writer, not only Carmichael but the Futches,
Yeah.
because they were brothers. It's hard to put yourself in that spot of how that must have been like, and that's the thing that's hard to read. And with some of these things, you think about these lining up and fighting and all this stuff, but most of the stuff took place in this war was sitting around. Elijah Hunt Rhodes' diary, All for the Union, talks about a lot of this. We just sat around and did nothing all day, waiting to get sick. That's when are we going to eat again? That was the real life of this.
Yeah, it's real. And, I think sometimes I'll go and read letters that, because obviously I like to research Oliver Otis Howard. I'm planning on writing a book about him once I'm done grad school in a few weeks. Book won't be for a few years though, because it's going to take me a long time to research that. It's interesting going to like an important anniversary, like April the 9th, the surrender. And Howard has no idea it's going on. And here he is writing his son,
Right.
And then you have a letter that his wife wrote him. I think it was on April 14th. She immediately wrote him and told him about the Lincoln assassination. Howard is not going to find out for another 2 days, but she wrote him, and she's basically putting on paper what she's feeling at the time. And she expresses her very, very concerned about Johnson now being the president. She said, this is the worst thing that could have possibly happened. And just basically, you could tell she was very shaken up and very, very worried about the country at that point. But there she is, right? She's just learned of it. And her immediate reaction is to write her husband, Howard, and tell him everything. He doesn't find out about it until the 17th. And he finds out
Andrew Johnson is the one thing the Manhunt show got right.
Oh, they ever.
That is the one thing. And people can, we'll talk with Dave Taylor here in a few weeks about that TV show. But if people who've studied the Lincoln assassination, and Lincoln assassination was my first foray into the Civil War history, going all the way back to high school. I was obsessed with it, and so I stuck with it all ever since. But when you watch that, and you really know, and you really really know what happened. Yeah, of course there are things that are wrong with it, but I see people going out of their way to really slam it. And I think it's because they're pigpiling. Because I think what surprised me of the social media content about that TV show was how few people in the Civil War world really know the Lincoln assassination.
Yeah.
And they jump on the stereotype stuff that's wrong. And look, yes, it's wrong. And a lot of it was wrong. But a lot of Gettysburg's wrong. A lot of Glory's wrong. Right?
Yep.
A lot of the Grant miniseries was wrong. A lot of the Sherman miniseries was wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. And so there are things about it that you can point out the things that are right and what they did get right. In a Manhunt, they got Johnson right. They nailed Johnson. They absolutely.
Oh, they did. And the thing with Manhunt is it is historical fiction. And yes, there is a lot wrong with it. There was some moments I was like, yeah, yikes, how's that going to go? But the thing is if people are watching it that are not into that, and they go and read the books, specifically like, Manhunt by James Swanson or American Brutus, that they are going to get into it and understand the history the same way that if the movie Gettysburg pulls you to go to that town, visit it, and read more, you're going to learn that there's a lot about the movie that is not accurate, but you can still enjoy it. It still was your way into it. I mean, my opinion, the best documentary about the Lincoln assassination is Killing Lincoln that came out a few years ago. That one was, it's only 90 minutes long.
And
so
ironically, the book that it came from was
so inaccurate.
Was very inaccurate.
But he had nothing to do with it.
No, but he talks about Lincoln sitting in the Oval Office,
I know,
which wasn't built then. But
yeah,
but that's the thing is you could obviously Kaufman's book American Brutus is the absolute gold standard, no question about that. Dr. Alfred's book Fortune's Fool, I was not a fan of. I just wasn't. It was too cliche.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you read Bishop's book, that one's the day-to-day one. I mean, the hour-to-hour one was really, really good. But I mean, even if you want to read the foolishness stuff like the Otto Eisenschimmel book, or if you want to read the book by Finus Bates, it's interesting because, the thing about that Manhunt TV series is they really, really push the idea that Booth's body was dumped in a river or something.
I know. It's like, no, he's with the family.
So it's kind of like they sat around and said, okay, what the Marines did, the SEAL team did to Bin Laden's body, let's make him do that to Booth's body. Because I can tell you, there's no doubt in the world that John Wilkes Booth is buried at the cemetery in Baltimore.
Yeah.
I mean, I looked me forever, and I actually found the bill that they charged the Booth family to bury him.
Yeah.
On the archives. So he's absolutely there. So why they did that, there are certain, that's when we talked to Dave Taylor, we're going to have on in a couple of weeks. And in my opinion, he's a top 3 most knowledgeable person on the Lincoln assassination.
Oh my God, he is so good.
I mean, he portrays John Wilkes Booth. He used to do the Booth Escape Tour in Maryland when he was living he lives in Texas now. And so we're gonna have a lot of talk about that. But they did certain things in that show which I thought were unnecessary.
Yes.
But I mean, I still enjoyed it. It doesn't matter.
It's still, it's historical fiction.
Like we said before, you and I get to meet an astronaut last month, right?
Yep.
And I remember asking her, and she'd flown in the space shuttle a bunch of times. I asked her, does she watch like Star Wars and cringe because it's done right? And she goes, no, I love it. Mm-hmm. She goes, I don't need this. It's entertainment. It doesn't have to be 100% right.
Yep.
And that's kind of the attitude you have to have with Manhunt, and you have to have with Glory and Gettysburg and stuff like that.
That's the attitude some of my classical studies professors had towards the movie Gladiator. Some of them were just like, literally what Maximus is in the movie. Are you entertained? Just be entertained by it. Others hated it because it was so historically inaccurate.
Oh, I didn't like it because I don't like Russell Crowe. I think he sucks.
I loved it. I loved it, but I'm a classical studies major. So,
but if you study the 54th Massachusetts and you watch Glory, okay, you realize how blatantly wrong Glory is. Yep. But it's still up there with Gettysburg probably being the best Civil War movie that there is.
It is so good. MJ said Howard in Manhunt was unnecessary. I actually love that. I know we found
it wasn't necessary because they had to talk about the Freedmen's Bureau. I mean,
and the one thing he says is he goes up to Stanton. He said Johnson is making this really hard for me. That is 100% true. Howard at that point had been in charge of the Freedmen's Bureau for about a month, and he's already realizing, wow, this job is not going to be easy for me. The one thing they got wrong, I shouldn't say it's even wrong, but they called him Oliver.
Right.
Everybody called him Otis. He went by his second name. And that was one thing where I was like, whatever.
They had to put him in there because it had to talk about, they had to talk specifically about how Johnson was trying to change Reconstruction, the Lincoln Plan. And so I think you had to have him in there. But again, I think, they got most, I don't want to say most of it wrong, but they got a lot of the stuff wrong, but they got the conceptual skeleton part of it right. But I'm looking forward to talking to Dave about it. And we're not going to talk to Dave before. We're going to go into this kind of blind with him and see, because that'll be that'll be like
it'll be a really fun conversation. Last time we had him on, it was so fun. The other thing too about Dave is I think he was one of the people they consulted for the Killing Lincoln documentary.
Yeah.
and that's why, that's one of the reasons that documentary is just, it's so, Tom Hanks narrates it. Jesse Johnson is the best Booth by far.
No, he is. He is.
So, and if you Google Jesse Johnson and look at pictures of him right now, he's blonde, but he looks like a blonde Booth. Like
Now the thing that that he did really well in the Killing Lincoln is he captured the personality.
oh yeah,
And the thing that Killing Lincoln did really, really well is they brought in some of the subordinate characters like James Tanner, the stenographer at the
yeah,
Peterson house, which really explained that now he, belongs to the ages versus angels, why they kind
yeah,
of explain that whole thing. Um, obviously a Swan they got right.
yeah,
The Manhunt series got Swan for the most part right, for the most part.
yeah.
But Thomas Jones specifically, they got that completely wrong.
Was he
Uh,
the African American? And he seemed
no,
like he just
that
did,
was Swan. That
he
was
seemed
Swan.
like he came from the discotheque.
Well, he was
It's just
big.
an
I'll do this
American bandstand or
because
something.
what he did was he basically was like, well, I'm not a slave, I'm a free man. So if I'm going to do this for you, you're going to pay
Mhm.
me. And Booth wasn't used to that, and so he tried to push him around. He's like, no, you want me to do this? You're gonna throw me floss me some paper.
Yeah,
I'm not going to do it. And they got that, and they made Samuel Cox out to be not all there.
yeah.
It was weird, but again, it's entertainment. If what those shows are really designed to do is to get you to kind of understand and learn a little bit about it and give you the thirst for knowledge to study more,
Yeah,
right?
it's just
That's
like
what,
if you've watched it, there are books that you can read to get the real story behind it. The other thing I
yeah.
liked about Killing Lincoln as well was that they talk a lot about Edward Doherty.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean, it does, and because there's so many people in the 16th New York, the Cavalry, the Lincoln's Avengers, who really played a big part in that whole thing. But again, it's an extension of the Civil War. It really, really is.
Yeah,
But the war may have be winding down at that point. I mean, Johnson surrenders the same day that Booth is killed,
yeah.
right on the 26th,
And same with the
and
Sultana had gone
right,
down that
everything
day
goes
too.
down there. But again, Reconstruction, and we saw that when we were studying the diaries of John Brown Gordon and people like that, James Longstreet, when we had Liz
Mhm.
Varon on, it goes on. The shooting stopped, but the war kind of continued with the philosophy and
Yeah,
the theories all through Reconstruction. All the black codes, everything that went on down in the South, the military districts. It's an ugly part of history that doesn't get talked about enough because unfortunately people like the war stuff because it's
yeah.
entertaining. It's for whatever reason.
But it's
People
still it's still
but
very important to talk about.
and war is an extension of politics, and the
Yeah,
politics usually extend beyond when wars end. And that's why, to truly understand even today's politics here in this country, you got to study the post-Civil War, not just the war, but the post-Civil War,
yeah.
because that's when a lot of the stuff kind of was put to the test.
Yep. And I mean, Howard writes about how tough it was for him on the Freedmen's Bureau. And I think it's because, he had it with Fernando Wood. Fernando Wood went at him because Fernando Wood is a Democrat in New York. He's a shit disturber. He's in the
Yeah,
Lincoln movie, brilliantly played by Lee Pace in the Lincoln movie. He's the character you
yeah,
love to hate in that movie. But he goes after Howard twice, accusing Howard of like, oh, this guy's like, you know, he's making money off the Freedmen's Bureau. There's weird stuff going on with the funding. The funding stuff was the bank part of it, not the bureau. But Howard did have people under him, just like Grant did when Grant was president, that were corrupt. And Howard trusted them, probably shouldn't have.
yeah.
And Howard admitted, like, yeah, there was stuff going on that probably shouldn't have been. But Howard in his memoirs is just like, okay, you want to know what I went through when I was on the bureau and what my guys went through when I sent them down to, because you had to have someone from the Freedmen's Bureau down in the South in each of the states kind of watching stuff. There's people going after their families. It was terrible. The stuff that Howard writes about it's horrible what they
Well,
did.
especially when a lot of these people are volunteers. They
Yeah,
weren't like soldiers. They were people who wanted to sign. They were abolitionist types who want to
yeah,
help out and just help out their fellow man. And you're getting people threatening their lives.
yeah,
Then the hell with this. I mean, I think of a lot of people are involved in some sort of volunteer activity in their lives. People here, everybody. Imagine if you're volunteering for something and you got people threatening to kill you for
yep. And your
volunteering.
family.
How long are you gonna do that for?
Yep. And
Right?
that's why, like, and then end of the Freedmen's Bureau, basically what happens to Howard is that's why he goes out west, because he's like, I need to go away from this for a while. It's very bad, and a lot of it is Fernando Wood personally attacking, again, for politics. Fernando Wood is a Democrat. He tried to get New York City to separate from the Union during the Civil War.
Mhm.
Howard is an abolitionist Republican, very publicly now, that
Yeah.
the war is over. Of course, Fernando Wood is going to go after him. William Sherman, um, he and Howard were good friends till the day that Sherman died. But
Mhm.
the one thing they could never talk about was politics, because Sherman is like so Democrat. He's Democrat. He's uh very racist, and Howard is their abolitionist. Um, Sherman did not agree with Howard's appointment to West Point as the
Mhm.
superintendent for that reason.
Well, a
Basically,
lot,
threw
even
it back.
people here up here in New England, Maine, especially New Hampshire, but especially Maine. If you were an abolitionist, you realize that this was going to hit your, this was going to hit your wallet.
Yeah,
I mean, people in Maine, people here, they still relied on slave labor to keep their costs down in the manufacturing up here. Not just cotton, but as far as fish, as far as everything goes.
mhm,
So that's why there are so many copperheads in Maine,
yeah,
because a free society meant their costs were going to be going up and their markets were going to be limited. And you had, like we said before, New York and New Jersey had elected Democratic governors during the Civil
yeah,
War because they'd had enough with it. They didn't want to deal with it anymore.
yeah,
Pennsylvania's got, like I said, has got a Democratic Congress, despite having a Republican governor, Andrew Curtin. And you saw little pockets here and there, but you also saw pockets in the South too, that were pro-union.
yeah. Free State of
Well,
Jones.
Free State of Jones, when that comes to mind, because that movie, it's not. So when you talk about the Civil War, it's a sectional war, but you have dots all throughout the North and the South. That's what makes it so complicated. Is the average person in high school, your high school, civics class, history class, you got the blue states versus the red states, and you think
Yeah,
they're fighting over this whole thing. It's way more complicated than that, and it really shows in Reconstruction
yeah,
afterwards. Because Reconstruction, when you're not sending your sons or fathers or brothers off to fight anymore, it's economics, it's money.
yeah.
You're going to do what's best for you, for your families, and your fortunes. Most people in the South had their fortunes wiped out in loss of slave property, but here in the North, your costs just came up because the cost of stuff that you're going to buy from the South is more expensive because now you're going to pay for their labor. And they didn't like that too much, especially the lobster fishermen in Maine.
Yeah, that's
No,
who Charles Tilden's family was
right?
connected with.
Yeah,
Michael Lentz mentions he's diving into Reconstruction. He's finding it's very complex, in more ways complex than the war itself. And Bjorn mentions a couple books. So Reconstruction by Eric Foner, and then which is just called Reconstruction, and said there's a lot of really good stuff being done right now. And then also Fergus Bordewich's Clan War is another one to check
yeah.
out too.
My two books that are really, really good on Reconstruction, and the reason why I like them is because they're taken from the perspective of Civil War generals and how they had to deal with Reconstruction.
Yeah.
The first one is Liz Varen's book on Longstreet.
Oh, yes.
If you first of all, it is the best, capital B, best on James Longstreet's book by far. Okay, but because it talks about how he has to change his attitude to go with the current Reconstruction, and how that one, and the reminiscences of John Brown Gordon.
Yeah.
Again, a hard fighting, fire breathing, fun loving guy that he was, and how in his state of Georgia,
Yeah.
with guys like Stone, right? And
Yeah.
that Bourbon triumvirate,
Yeah.
how they had to deal with the new, and how they had to take their attitudes for fighting for the South, and how they had to change a little bit now to maintain home rule in Georgia in that Reconstruction era.
Even
But
Beauregard during
right,
Reconstruction.
there are a lot of books on them, but what I like about those books, it's from the perspective of Confederate generals who fought for it and how they had to change, especially Longstreet, because his transformation is a 180.
Yeah.
It's like Derek Jeter playing for the Red Sox all of a sudden. It's what the hell? It's a complete sea change for him, to the point where he's in New Orleans and he has black soldiers fighting against former Confederates, right, on the Canal Street riots
Yeah.
going on after the war, 1867, around there. And it's a fascinating read. So there's, he mentions those books on Reconstruction, which are great too. Though, but these ones are great because it you take a general and how he has to deal with the politics of the new world, and
Yep.
it's fascinating. Hancock was one of the military commanders down there,
Yep.
in that area, and how his attitude changed towards it. Um, but it's just, again, it's fascinating, and unfortunately, it's still going on today.
Yeah, it is.
Yes,
Yeah, and Miranda mentions anything written in Reconstruction by Heather Cox Richardson is great too. So there's some great books, and yeah, the ones Bjorn mentioned, you can get those from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop as well. Which is like,
yeah.
I am so into supporting Abraham Lincoln Bookshop because they're the independent bookstore.
Wait till we visit that place. You're gonna be amazed at it.
I know. That's
You have to get a picture of you in front of the big Lincoln head.
yeah. Also, speaking of books, we're going to confirm the date soon, but this is our next. Yeah, I can't show it because the background.
You can, yeah. Well, it's the
Yeah.
it's the
Anyway,
new.
Iron Dice of Battle by Tim Smith is our next book.
Mhm.
Which I actually bought the copy for you from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah.
You know, but there's so much more that goes into this too. And in as much as we tend to focus on battles and people like that, the underlying aspect to all of it is attitudes of the time and
Yeah.
politics of the time. And like we said before, war is just an extension of politics. It's just that's exactly what it is. And there's so many people as you kind of read and study some of the folks involved in this, you really get to not know them, but get in their head a little bit. You can understand their actions more by how they felt,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And that's kind of what we talked about with the Siege of Yorktown with if you've read McClellan's letters, you know that he's referred to his soldiers as his children and all that. That is because when you look more closely to it, he's witnessing what happens at Sevastopol. I feel like I can't say that. And he sees the dead soldiers there. He sees how horrific it is, and that sticks with him. And that's why that is factoring into his decisions
Right.
that he's making. Is he doesn't want to see his soldiers go through that. He doesn't want to see their wives be widowed and their children be without a father. And that's why he's kind of this father figure. It doesn't excuse his actions at Yorktown at all, but it's an
But
interesting
no,
like it's interesting
but
to think about that.
well, since we mentioned Gettysburg a little while ago, the politics in the Army of the Potomac is a microcosm in a lot of different ways. Before the Democratic generals, I mean Reynolds turned down Lincoln, didn't want the job,
Yep.
and if you read Kent Masterson Brown's fantastic book Retreat from Gettysburg, speaking of books, and he talks about why he didn't attack on the 13th of July, and we had Gelso on. We talked about it, where Lincoln tells him, "You must attack Lee now, and if you fail, I'll take the blame."
Yep.
And then
There's no
Meade's like,
way.
he's like, "Are you kidding me?
There's
I'm a
no way that's
Democrat. You're a
happening.
Republican. You're not. You're going to blame me for this. I ain't doing this." And then a lot of that goes into all this stuff, the decision makings that were made. We talked about in the West about how Grant and Rosecrans, they were fighting because I think they both knew whoever was the hero of the West was going to be president someday.
Yep.
And I think that's how they both saw it, and that's why they were rivals. There, a lot of these guys, the politicians weren't sure, but a lot of the generals knew the Union was going to win, and they
Yeah.
knew that when this thing was over, whoever the hero was going to be a president someday.
Yeah. There was going to be there was a line of presidents. You had Grant, Garfield, whose presidency was unfortunately.
McKinley, obviously,
Yeah.
you got a whole bunch of Garfield,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, and so a lot of these people came out of this, and Hancock obviously ran. He did not win. Obviously, McClellan did run, did not win, and they would
Yeah.
take in their experiences and their successes of the war on the next stage. And again, these are humans. These are people who
Yeah.
want to live another day
I think one of
politically.
the only general that really, I shouldn't say only, but one general who was really not into politics, avoided it like the plague, was Sherman. And, when we talked to Guelzo about Howard after I wish that was an amazing discussion. The post discussion that was not recorded was amazing. And Guelzo mentioned Howard going west was one of the best things for him, obviously, and I've said that before too. But it's also because Sherman didn't care about the politics. It was not part of the Western theater at all in the way that it was a part of the Army of the Potomac. It was not a culture there. So Howard's able to go west, and I'm sure Sherman knew how he felt about, I'm sure Sherman knew going into it, this is a guy who's an abolitionist, puts him in charge of an army.
Yeah.
And he writes Howard and says, I've heard what happened in the, basically Chancellorsville and your reputation. Trust me, I don't care about that. And the two remained, despite the political differences, good friends throughout their entire life. Like Sherman in his where he lived in New York had a picture of Howard and Slocum, pictures of them, all his commanding generals on his wall. And he said to Howard one day when Howard was visiting him, you guys are going to be on this wall long after I'm gone. Slocum and Howard would often go to the theater or the opera with Sherman when they all lived in New York. And Howard always sat on his right side, and Slocum always sat on his left. And that's how Sherman wanted it, which I thought that was so so there you have these three guys, all different political views that are able to remain friends, they're able to stay friends. But the politics, the Western theater, not as much as what you see in the Eastern theater. And that's why I find the Western theater so fascinating, is it's kind of without the politics.
Well, he said, Sherman, my family said, if nominated, I'll not run. If elected, I'll not serve. He wanted no part of politics.
Yep. He's
He
like,
was
I'm
a
not doing
soldier. He
it.
was a soldier. And it was clear that I'm sure Howard, he was a breath of fresh air when he got out there and had to deal with
Yep.
this, because everything you did in the East was watched.
Yep.
Everything. And obviously Lincoln's going to appoint Meade to be president. To be commander.
Yep.
Because Meade probably would have said no too.
Oh, he would. Yeah. I think when Reynolds was eye-opening for him, when he's like, wow, this dude just turned down the job.
Because again, everything, how the hell are you going to take that job if you're basically being puppet mastered by Stanton, Halleck, and Lincoln?
Yeah. And that's why that's one of the reasons Reynolds didn't take it.
Halleck had experience. He fought in the West, obviously. Yeah. Lincoln fought in the Black Hawk War.
Black Hawk War.
Yeah, I don't enunciate that one. But again, that's how it was. And nowadays, think about it. You'll see people, generals in today's military, who don't respect any U.S. president who doesn't serve. It's not so much of a thing lately because there hasn't been a military president in a while, but back in the day, that was always a big issue.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but if I'm McClellan and I've been over to Europe and I've seen stuff and I'm now commanding an army, I really don't want somebody who, when they wrote about the Black Hawk War, all they said was about the mosquitoes and fighting them. I really don't want that person telling me how I should be doing things.
Oh, there's no question about it. But it's good though. And when you're looking at the early part of the war, try to bring it back to the peninsula, I'm gonna make every effort. It's fascinating because you really, if anything, when you study the siege of Yorktown, what you see the beginning stages of the Army of Northern Virginia, how it comes together. Yes. The Department of the Achaia, Department of the Peninsula, Department of Northern Virginia, how it all comes together under this wing, the Department of Northern Virginia, which eventually gets called the Army of Northern Virginia. And this is all Joseph E. Johnson who puts this all together. And then Lee takes it, kind of like the way McClellan left the Army for future generals like Meade. Johnson took that Army, left it for Lee. Now, it would have been fascinating to see what would have happened at Fair Oaks if Johnson never got shot.
Yeah.
How long Johnson was going to, he probably would have held that for a while, but how's that going to change?
I wonder if Lee eventually would have been sent out west because of Bragg.
I think he was always going to defend Virginia. I think he was a guy. I think the thing with him was that he's going to fight, but he's going to have to be in Virginia.
Yeah, I do think
who knows though? Maybe
is one of the underrated commanders of the Civil War. He's so fascinating. He's so clearly he's in Sherman's head, because when Sherman kind of breathes a sigh of relief when Hood takes over, because he's like, oh, good, he'll fight. But then, you have Howard basically saying Hood's an idiot. That's the only time Howard insults somebody in his memoirs.
You see the personalities, especially Joseph E. Johnson, who's a guy, we saw this later on during the Atlanta campaign, where he is going to avoid a fight. He's going to play defense. He's going to fall back to a defensive line. Don't forget, too, before he did fall back from Yorktown, he advocated falling back before. Yep. It was cool to say that, right? He didn't want to put himself in a position where he's going to fight offensively or defensively in a bad spot, because you've got Gustavus Smith and you've got all these people spread all over the place that even if they were going to get attacked by all that artillery from McClellan, they were going to get smoked. So he knew to fight back. You sort of saw that again. Now, this is why he was so pissed off early in the war when they gave up Harper's Ferry. And Johnson, the only time he really lost his shit on Davis was when they gave up Harper's Ferry
Yeah.
at the very, very beginning. And you saw that as he's falling back towards Atlanta.
Yeah.
We saw all those battles, and he ends up getting to places like Pickett's Mill, right? Or Kennesaw, where hey,
Yeah.
I can fight, I can arm this place, I can defend this place, and make Sherman hit me. And both times Sherman does, what happens? Sherman gets pounded.
Yeah. And he's also like Johnson at that point has amazing subordinates. You
He
got
does,
Pat Claiborne, you know,
but the
and
problem was
Granbury.
the problem was that he doesn't have the troops to beat Sherman,
Yeah.
so he's going to fall back eventually. When he finally gets to Atlanta, falls back to Atlanta, and he loses Atlanta. That's the final straw for Davis. He wants an offensive guy. He's going to put in Hood now because he's sick of this defense guy, which is probably the worst thing he ever did, was putting Hood in at that point.
I agree.
But again, you can see, and then you saw when the Army of Tennessee ends up basically falling apart. Johnson's in the Carolinas now, and he's falling back to slow down the army to Sherman again. Coming from the marsh of the sea up, he's still doing the same tactic, but he runs out of steam at Bentonville, and that's the end of it. But he's never an offensive guy, but he's like a war of attrition. He's going to keep fighting you to wear down your men to kill that initiative to keep fighting. So really, he epitomized the Confederate Army in politics, but he was never really given the chance to do it. But eventually his luck was going to run out. And Joseph E. Johnson, he's there at the very beginning. He's there at the very, very end.
Yeah.
But again, he stayed consistent. He doesn't get enough credit. And a lot of people don't get enough credit because he's not that sexy, flashy, I'm going to come get you guy.
Yeah.
Right.
No, he's very, like, thinks a lot about it. Bjorn mentions, speaking of the Atlanta campaign, this summer will be the publication of volume 1 of a multi-volume history of the Atlanta campaign by David Powell. We have David Powell's books about Chickamauga, the 3-volume set. They're amazing.
We do.
Got David Powell's books. He's done some for Emerging Civil War. The same one that we had for Ed Lowe on about his Longstreet book.
Yeah.
Which is another Longstreet book, by the way. That is worth
definitely
reading as well. But David Powell has books about Chattanooga, which they're so good. Like he's a great author.
And before we jump off, we have to thank Getty's Gear, who is streaming this live from
everybody watching us
from their studio today, from their store on Baltimore Pike. Getty's, we can't say enough good things about Getty's Gear and Carrie and the gang they do over there. Best cigars in the world, best coffee. So he was putting this on today, was offering coffee. Anybody wants to come watch our little thing. So if anybody's watching from Getty's Gear, thank you for joining us. And
we will come over for coffee there probably on Saturday of Memorial Day weekend.
We're going to talk to Carrie here shortly about trying to maybe do something. We're going to figure something out Memorial Day weekend. But thank you for him for doing this and all the support he gives us, because it's great. It was great to see that they're going to put this on and putting our ugly mugs in front of his customers.
They did post a picture of us.
Whether it's food being served, or drinks, which kill anybody's appetite, especially me. But we do appreciate that. And like we said before, it's a good friend of his as far as us in the podcast. Definitely go visit them, and we'll definitely do some stuff with them. So
they just said thank you. So
no, I appreciate that. So
and
that's
Michael
good to
Lenz says they're awesome. Yeah, we will definitely be there.
But you know what though? In all seriousness, they are though. And
I know they do so much promotion of all the history stuff.
The funny part about it was, we met Carrie for the first time we were there this past spring, but I've been buying cigars from Getty's Gear for years, back when they were the old place.
That's where I bought one of your Christmas presents.
Yeah.
Too.
And so I would get a box of cigars every Christmas. This is going back years now. And I would stay with friends and they would put me at their house, and I would buy a box of cigars from Getty's Gear, and they would ship them to him, and I would go there all the time. And there were other cigar places in town you can visit. Well, there's really one more now, but Getty's Gear is the place to go.
Getty's Gear is the best. And they had you got the cigar last time. That was what the brand General Grant smoked.
Yeah,
right?
that was a good one. I mean, I love my cigars, but it's a great place. But they sell T-shirts, hats that you could buy, mementos.
So they're pet friendly. They've got pet treats in there.
We have a pillow in our house from Getty's Gear.
We do.
We do. Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So definitely check them out, and we'll definitely try to catch up with them. Maybe we'll try to set something up with them over down there if they'll allow us, so we can
Yeah.
figure something out. So, anyway, so we're getting ready to jump off here, Mary. It's almost noontime already. Time flies when
Yeah.
we're talking about Yorktown, apparently.
Yes. And everything else through the Civil War.
Definitely. And by the way, I'd be remiss if I don't forget too, is Lisa Sammy is doing her thing at Tudor Hall this weekend.
Tomorrow.
I'm glad you let me forget that. So if you're in town, if you're in that area,
she's on here right now. So
if you're in Maryland, Maryland, go see her do her presentation at Tudor Hall,
it's
the
awesome.
Booth Family House, which is definitely worthwhile to go check out as well. I also, before we sign off, a little self-promotion, Mary. You and I, of all people, are going to be doing a presentation on Friday night before Memorial Day at the Masonic Lodge down at the Diamond, Lodge 336, Good Samaritan Lodge, which I am a member of. And we are going to be doing a presentation where I'm going to be portraying Colonel Edward Cross telling his story, and you'll be portraying Elizabeth Thorne telling her story. We'll be dressed up in our uniforms and your dress, and we're going to be it's going to be a fundraiser for Gettysburg Foundation. So if you like the foundation, which a lot of people should, it's a fun thing for them. The lodge will be advertising this, but it's going to be a Friday night around 6 p.m. the Friday before Memorial Day. So if you're in town, you buy a ticket and you come see us, and there's a dinner involved, and it's going to be a lot of fun supporting a good cause. Last year we did something similar with Gettysburg Foundation, Spangler Farm, right?
Which is awesome.
And this year we're going to be doing it at the Masonic Lodge, but we're going to be dressed up, and I'm going to pretend to be Edward Ephraim Cross of the 50th.
And I'm going to be Elizabeth Thorne.
Definitely. So definitely come check that out. We'll have a lot of fun. There'll be some stuff for that. Watch the site for that. All right. So what's coming up for us next, Mary?
So our next episode will be dropping in a couple of weeks. It will be the episode that we recorded with Dr. Alan Guelzo about his new book, Voices from Gettysburg, which the book will be released on May the 21st. So Tuesday, May 21st. It is excellent. If you're into Gettysburg or just the Civil War, check it out. Our episode after that will be with Dave Taylor to talk about the show Manhunt. And then our episode after that, which will be sometime in June, will be about Lew Wallace. So we will be doing another biography of a general episode. We will be talking about the awesome Lew Wallace, who involved in the battle that saved Washington, D.C., involved with Cincinnati, and unfortunately sidelined by Grant after Shiloh. And best-selling author as well.
And he pissed me off with the Lincoln conspiracy, by the way.
Well, yeah, that's kind of a dark side of his history.
Yeah, he did. Anyway, so thanks for joining us for this little thing we do. We appreciate it. We appreciate, again, Getty's Gear for having us on in their shop. That's pretty cool. There. We appreciate that. Hopefully you got a lot of people. Who knows if you did, but we definitely appreciate the support. But we will talk to you, Carrie, if you're still on. We'll reach out to you soon, see if we can plan something for that weekend. And any last words from you there, Fincheru, before we jump
thanks,
off?
For being the awesome co-host you are. And thanks to everybody for coming on here, asking your awesome questions. We really, really appreciate the questions because it helps guide our discussion, the book recommendations, all of that. You guys are all awesome. We would not be here without you.
That is true. And don't forget, it's cigar season. So go to Getty's Gear, get your cigars.
And I have a cigar.
You do. Today. Absolutely. It's a good stuff. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go Bruins. It's freaking Bruins. But in any case, we'll see what happens. Hopefully your team is still going. I think my team is going to be falling like the Maple Leafs today. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys. We will talk to you all soon.